guess all I gotta do is measure out about 6 feet. Alright, 6 feet is way more than enough. Even when you get out here to the wing tip, as you get out past the landing light, then that leading edge skin goes farther forward and the ribs go farther up there. But so even there where the ribs are longer, the 6 feet was more than enough. So what do I got hanging over there? About almost a foot. So good 5 feet plus is good, because it's a lot easier to have extra than not enough. Why, squirrel? Alright, this side is done with the reinforcing tape. I'll go ahead and trim off the excess of those where they're hanging over quite a bit. I'm going to leave tags on them to be able to handle when I go to tear them off. Because what we do with these, let's see, it's find the edge where it's going to, the hard edge, and take a razor blade and put down there and then just pull this up, and that'll cut that off. So anyway, like I said, that's it. That's done. That's good. Reinforcing tape is all on this side, so now I have to get some help so that I can flip it over and do the other side. We're at plan 1B or C or D or something like that on rotating the wing. This was partially kind of my first idea. My first idea was to hang the wing from the hinge points from my beam in the ceiling up here. I think it's plenty strong enough to support that wing. Then I thought I'd get the rotators that I built for the fuselage out and modify them to use for a rotator for the wing, but my plan didn't work out so well down here on the wing tip. I went ahead and put a hitch ring up in that beam, in that timber up there, and run some string down the outboard aileron hinge and tied it up there. I'm going to start out with stitching up that fuel tank bay there on the inboard section of it. I can do that by myself without any trouble. And then once I get that all done, I can get my wife and somebody else, whoever else happens to come along unluckily enough to get it, I can rope them into helping me. So here's my layout for rib stitching. It's a lot easier than what I've been doing with the gluing and stuff like that. Not near as much stuff to deal with. I've got my needles, and generally we use the bent needle like this, and demonstrate that a little bit later. And then for some things you want a straight needle. I've got a couple straight needles here, but I'm not really going to use those. In fact, this one I think I made. Got a piece of welding rod. There's another bent nose. These are 12 inches, I think. Yeah, and we just dug out some repair needles. My wife found these. I've got some big upholstery needles someplace, but I haven't seen them for 20 years or so. I just went looking for them, and of course I couldn't find them. I'll find them someday when I'm looking for something else, I'm sure. But my wife got these needles out, and these hoop needles here, these bent needles, are way too small for what I need. But these big needles will be a little easier to use for what we're doing here than these long needles for this, because the fuel tank bay there just goes through one layer. I just go in and around the bottom rib there and then back out again. This is the twine, the string used to lace the ribs with. There's two types. This is the flat style here, and some people don't like it because it can take a twist, put a twist in it, but I haven't had any trouble with it like that. And you can take it across the wing, across the top of the rib, and it'll go flat and stick down like that. It doesn't protrude much. This is the other type of string that a lot of other people use. It's round, and they like that because it doesn't twist. This is the third type of string, and this is not used for rib lacing. This is what we used when we stitched the fabric together to make the envelope for the fuselage, and that's what this string is used for in the sewing machine, to stitch fabric together. Not used for rib lacing. And of course, as I've shown before, this is the Bible for polyfiber here. It's a big, thick book. It's got the instructions on how to do it, and then in the back, got the STC in the back, and then it's got all the information on different polyfiber products right here, how to mix them, things like that. For sewing the fabric together, when we made the envelope for the fuselage, you see there's different types, but we use this folded fell seam here. That's the one that's recommended the most. French fell seam, I think that's what we used here. Now you can do it by hand using a baseball stitch, but fortunately my wife is pretty handy and got a good sewing machine, so she did that. Now this is free copies of these books. It's got excerpts out of there. Doesn't have near as much information, but it's got most everything you need. Now you can get a practice kit. It comes in a little box, and it has small containers of everything in it that you need to practice the fabric work. It's got a little container of Polytack, a little container of MEK, Polybrush, all of that kind of stuff, and it's got a little wooden frame you put together, and then you can glue the polyfiber. There's a little bunch of polyfiber in there. You can glue that to the frame and practice gluing and practice shrinking and all of that kind of stuff. I bought a couple of those kits to put in the airplane with me when I was going out in the field for long periods of time, to use for a repair kit to keep on hand for just repairs. But the little framework worked pretty good for putting polyfiber on and then heat shrinking it down to use for grommets and things like that we use on the airplane. Now there's lots of different types of covering, or there's several different types of covering for the airplane. Of course, the old-fashioned one was grade A cotton tape, and they used either nitrate or butyrate dope. Then polyfiber came out. There's Superflight System. This is a book for it. I've never tried it. Fairly similar. I think it uses the same Dacron fabric. Then there's Stewart Systems. It uses a different type of glue and stuff on it. There's a new one, Ultrex or whatever it is. It's kind of a plastic, I think, that gets shrunk on and put on. A lot of guys like it. I didn't like it because you're kind of limited. It comes in the color that you want it already, and you can't really do anything with it with changing the color scheme or anything like that on it. Anyway, this is what we're going to do. We're going to start stitching that ribs up. Get those. See if we can't get those stitched up. Oh, and we got special knots. Let's see if this one has it in here. This one talks about the rib lacing, but it doesn't tell you the details on the rib lacing. The big book, and FAA's AC 4313 has a whole bunch of stuff on rib lacing. showing how to make the different types of knots and stuff like that. So here's instructions on how to make the, what do they call that, modified seine knot that you use for, recommended use for this. Okay, I can put these books and stuff away except for this one on how to tie the modified seine knot. I don't know, my DVD is getting kind of wore out that I've got from the EAA that shows how to do that, and I don't have internet up here in the basement anymore, so I'm not sure I can. What I've done before is find a video on that and watch it while I'm doing the rib lacing until I get it figured out, and it kind of takes a few times going through that before you get the knot figured out, how to make that knot. It's fairly complex. It's not too bad after you've done a few hundred of them, but to start out with it's kind of hard. Well, I got my laptop out here. I haven't had it out for years. I'll see if I've got a program or one of the files on there that I can use maybe to tie that knot. As I've mentioned, this is the Bible for using the polyfiber fabric cover system. It's got all the information on the polyfiber system itself. In the back of it, it's got the STC and all the aircraft that are covered under the STC. It's got all the stuff on how to use all the different chemicals and things like that. This is Advisory Circular 4313. This happens to be 1B. And this is the Bible on pretty much everything to do with aircraft repairs, stuff like that. So here's the contents on it. That starts out on the first one. You got materials and practices for wood structures and fixing all kinds of wood structures and stuff, delamination and plywood and things like that. Splicing of spars, spar replacement, plywood ribs, all the good stuff on wood anyway. Chapter 2 is fabric covering, and that's got all the information you need for fabric covering. Of course, they tell you to go to the manufacturer's sites and stuff for their specifications, but this is generally the stuff for fabric covering. You got problem areas, synthetic fabric, natural fabric, recovering, preparation of the structure, fabric seams, lacing, stitch spacing, fasteners, all of that stuff that you need to know about for covering. And it goes into all kinds of other things, propellers and mechanical nuts and bolts and aluminum repairs, and now it's got fiberglass and carbon fiber and stuff like that in it nowadays. Generally it's the Bible for everything for inspection and repairs on aircraft, and it shows the seams. You've got stitching here, how to do different stitches and stuff on there if you're sewing fabric together to make a larger piece of fabric from smaller ones. And then the overlap of seams over metal structure and wood structure here where you've got tubes and stuff like that. And here's the standard internal modified seine knot used for single and double rib stitching. If you look, here's a picture of the rib stitching with the seine knot, and on the original, in the old days, the original rib stitching was done on the outside of the wing. You run the rib stitchings down over the ribs, but then you tie the knot and then run the line up to the next one, and they stay on top of the wing. Nowadays we have the modified seine knot, in which we push those knots down underneath the cover and run the strings, the cord, underneath and then back up to make our rib stitches. So this is a more modern method here. You've got your initial knot that you put in to start with, basically a square knot, and then a half hitch on both sides of it to run through, and then you run the needle down through the hole. You've got holes in the fabric on both sides where the line goes through, so you take a curved needle, push through your first hole that you run your starter knot in, run it along underneath the fabric and poke it out through the next hole, and then pull it out, run it back through and everything, and then we do the modified seine knot there then. That gives you instructions on how to do that. And then there's a splice knot. Anyway, Oh, here's the one that's important. This is how you figure out how far apart you want your spacing in your ribs. Is you've got maximum spacing of rib lacing in inches, and then this is the maximum velocity, never exceed speed of the airplane. So we're looking at about 150 miles an hour for the Cubs. And in the prop wash area, the slipstream area from the prop wash, you go up 2.5 inches, and then if you go up to the outside of the slipstream into the normal area, you got 3.5 inches, and then it gets closer together the faster the speed is. So like a Belanca that is really fast, you'd have 200 miles an hour. Your slipstream spacing would be less than 2 inches, and your other spacing would be about 2.5 inches, and all the way down to about 200 and must be 230, 240 miles an hour, and then after that it doesn't look like it's supposed to go any higher than that. And that's the VNE speed too, not your normal cruise speed or anything like that. There's how to do a repair of a tear. You got your stitching around there, and here's fiberglass and plastics. A lot of this on the fabric is for grade A cotton, although they do have stuff for the more modern stuff, and they refer you to the manufacturer's specifications for that. So anyway, that is the Bible for that, for everything, all aircraft repairs. Well, of course, you're supposed to refer to the aircraft manufacturer's specification and repairs and stuff like that too, but this is where you get your start from, minimum acceptable practices. So I've got this video from the EAA and Polyfiber, I guess, together, a DVD, and it's about wore out, but it goes through how to do the rib lacing. We got our starter knot down here, so that's what I'm using for reference on figuring out how to do the rib stitching on this airplane. And once you do 40 or 50 of them, then you get it down to where you don't need to refer to this anymore. You can figure it out. To start with, for the first few of them, it's good to have this reference, and it's been 6 years or so since the last time I did this, so it's good to have this reference. And I don't feel bad about that, because when we did the repair rib stitching on this wing, when we did the annual on it, the mechanic that came down, he had to look up the videos on how to do this knots and stuff on it too. So anyway, that's that. I'm starting the rib stitching now. I've got, well, I've showed you before the standard needles. This is a straight needle, and that's not one you use for rib stitching like that, like we're doing. This is a curved needle, and this will be used on the ribs to stitch that. But I'm doing these partial ribs in there in the fuel tank bay right now, and they're not full ribs, they're just down on the bottom. So my wife dug out this, I don't know whether that's a darning needle or what it is, but it's got a pretty big eye in it, big enough that I can get the thread through it most of the time and see it. It's got a blunt end on it, so it's not poking holes and everything. We've already put holes in the fabric, pilot holes in the fabric for that. So I'm going to take some string here, some cord, lacing cord, and the tendency that you're going to have, that everybody has, that they want to do, is to get, in fact they say that in some of the books, to get 15 or 16 or 18 feet of cord on there to start with. A couple of reasons why that's not a good idea. I just thread that through the eye of the needle and then run kind of a figure 8 knot through here, and this stuff is waxed, so that knot comes loose a good portion of the time. Well, anyway, in my opinion, I mean, I did that too. I thought that was going to be a good idea, but I've rethought that idea now as I've got some experience, and there's a couple good reasons not to use 12 or 15 or 20 feet of cord on there. One is there's a good chance of getting it tangled up while you're doing that. Two, it's a good chance of getting it down on the floor and getting it dirty. And number three, as you're pulling all this cord through that holes that you've punched in the wing, it's acting as a saw, and it can saw those holes up and make them bigger. Not that you're not covering them up with tape anyway, but I like to keep them as neat as possible. And the main reason, something that I just come up with or just learned and figured out, was the problem we had on this wing was that the rib lacings broke in a spot or two, and because it's all tied together, it loosened up on the whole rib and wound up with 3 or 4 ribs that the rib lacing came loose on. So my idea here now is to do a little shorter section to keep it neater, but it also makes sure that there's all the cord is not all tied in together, so that if one of them breaks, the other ones will break. There'll be a break in the cord, so they won't break. A break in the length of the cord, so it won't break so easily, maybe.